but our ancestors who created India. There are many textual evidences. These lines from the Vishnu Puran is just one of them. It's very clear. North of the ocean, south of the Himalaya lies the nation Varsham, lies the nation of Bharat, and there live the descendants of Bharat. They're the Bharatvasis.
And even there, the Bharatiya kings were always fighting for their freedom. This is a strand which we often don't talk about. For example, Maharana Pratap is dismissed as just a small ruler of Mewar. He was much more.
In our history, particularly in the last 1,000 years, is that it is more the history of our invaders rather than the history of our ancestors who fought those invaders. But 1,000 years of invasions, we Indians are still standing. We are still here, right? So, in my mind, the real story of the last 1,000 years is not 1,000 years of defeats. It's 1,000 years of the greatest resistance in human history. No bunch of indigenous people have fought so long and so hard to protect their culture. First millennium, India was by far the wealthiest land on earth, 35% of the world's GDP. Just to give you a perspective, US today is 25% of the world's GDP.
उत्तरम यत समुद्रस्य हिमाद्रैश्चैव दक्षिणम वर्ष तद भारत नामः भारती yatra santiti. This is how the Vishnu Puran describes Bharatvarsh. Land to the north of the oceans, land to the south of the Himalayas. That is Bharatvarsh. That is the land of Bharatvasis. My guest today on the Chakraview podcast is best-selling author, diplomat, writer, podcaster, producer, Amish. Amish, welcome.
Thank you.
With the Chola Tigers, the Avengers of Somnath.
Thank you.
I want to begin by asking you, Amish, why you chose these lines from the Vishnu Puran to describe Bharatvarsh when you talk about the Chol Vansh.
I think there are many things around the discussions about our history which trouble me, which irritate me. Various things like, Indians, they never wrote anything. We were an oral culture. Apparently, the British came and somehow saved us, which is nonsense. Ancient Indians wrote a hell of a lot, more than the rest of the ancient world combined. Or that, we were basically just losing 1,000 years of defeats. I have some views on that too. We'll discuss that with this book. But a third thing that really troubles me is this: there was no India, and that the British created us. So we should be thankful to the British, right? And this is utter nonsense, actually. Uh, which is why I wanted to start with this line. Because when they say that there was no India, they're essentially asking for textual evidence to prove that it wasn't the British, but our ancestors who created India. There are many textual evidences. These lines from the Vishnu Puran is just one of them. It's very clear. North of the ocean, south of the Himalaya lies the nation Varsham, lies the nation of Bharat, and there live the descendants of Bharat. There the Bharatvasis live. Our ancestors created India. It's evidenced in the Vishnu Puran. There are various other textual evidences, and we can discuss that if you want. But the British didn't create India. We shouldn't give them credit for stuff that they didn't do.
But what about, I'll come to the Chola Tigers in just a moment, but what about those who say, fine, there were these villages and they had their chieftains, or they may have been the Magad Empire, there may have been empires in the past, but they did not control the whole country, the manner in which, for example, the Mughals did. No one else controlled the country like the Mughals or the British. That's the traditional historical perspective we've been taught.
Not true. The Mauryan Empire was far bigger than the Mughals at their empire. And the correct term is actually Timurid, not Mughals.
Yes.
We call them Mughals. They call themselves Timurid,
Timurids.
descendants of Timur. It's evidenced by their seals, by the way. We think Babur is the founder of their dynasty. They themselves thought of Timur as the founder. That's how their circular seals were structured. So Timurids. But the Mauryans controlled far more than the Timurid Mughals ever did. The Timurid Mughals, you could argue that their administration did not extend to all of India. Their core area of control was between Lahore and Agra.
Yes.
Whereas the Mauryans, as is evidenced in the texts such as Arthashastra and various stone pillars, various other things, that the roads that they built, it's all evidenced out there. They actually ran an effective administration which ran those places. To be fair, the British also ran an effective administration. But when in our history books they say that Alauddin Khulji controlled all of India or Aurangzeb controlled all of India, Alauddin Khilji only lived in Delhi. If they're showing Tamil Nadu and Karnataka as a part of Alauddin Khilji's empire, the only thing that happened was he raided those areas, looted them, and went back
Yes.
to Delhi. That doesn't mean running the place, right?
His administration did not, his
no,
writ did
not
not
at
run
all.
in those
No,
areas. That
not at
very-
all. There were times when Aurangzeb wanted temples in Varanasi destroyed. He couldn't implement it because his writ did not run there. The
And
various,
even though
he would have collected loot from there.
Yes.
Yes.
His capital
That-
was Agra and he could not even have
yeah.
his writ prevail in Varanasi.
So, in many of these empires in the last millennium, you could argue they didn't run an effective administration across all these places. The places that are shown as a part of their empire in our history textbooks, large parts of it they could loot whenever they want. Yes, that's a fact. But to give credit to the British, yes, the British actually administered many of those lands, including those that were called the princely states. In effect, the British administered at least their revenue policies, no doubt.
It's interesting you mentioned the Mughals, and when they say Mughals ruled this country from 1526 when Babur invaded India to, let's say, I'm not coming to 1857 because barely was Bahadur Shah Zafar an emperor in name, especially after the Peshwas came in, the later Mughals post 1707. So it's actually from Akbar 1556
Yes.
to 1707. That's
Yes,
all that the
150
Mughals
years,
have
yeah.
ruled for about
And
150 odd years.
And even Akbar controlled much of, conquered large parts of India more in the late 1560s and
Yes.
1570s.
Yes.
So the effective rule actually began around that time, 1570s.
And even there, the Bharatiya kings were always fighting for their freedom. This is a strand which we often don't talk about. For example, Maharana Pratap is dismissed as just a small ruler of Mewar. He was much more, but I'll come to Maharana Pratap in a moment.
There were rebellions all the time, even from, forget about from the big kings, even from communities which were relative to the Timurid Mughals, relatively powerless. Akbar was among the better Timurid Mughal rulers.
Yes.
That cannot be denied. But where do you think his body is?
Yeah,
Where is his
I
body?
mean, Sikandra,
It should be in Akbar's tomb.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not there.
yeah.
Okay. There was a Jat rebellion. This was during the time of Aurangzeb. Akbar's tomb had been attacked. His body by the Jat, because they sacked they attacked Agra. From what I recall, they'd killed the Mughal governor, Agra,
Correct.
which is a heartland. And Akbar's body was dragged out of his tomb and burnt
Yeah.
by the Jats. There were rebellions all the time. This is the equivalent of during the peak of the British rule, maybe just 30 years after Queen Victoria's death, some Irish person going to Queen Victoria's tomb and dragging a body out and burning it. It's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable.
In fact, the
There were
folklore is-
constant rebellions all
Yeah.
the time. There's no doubt for 1,000 years. That is a fact. It's an unthinkable act during the time of Aurangzeb
Yeah.
for what was actually the greatest Timurid Mughal. The empire was primarily built by Akbar,
Yeah.
actually. He was the great conqueror.
So let me just take a step back. When you write about the Chola tigers, you want our people to know that we had great kings, and even if you were to compare the Mughals and the Chola dynasty, Mughals in their zenith, 150 years, or in their entirety, 350 odd years, 330 years. What about the Cholas? Oh, close to 1,000 years in all phases.
So, look, the way I see it, the lack of balance in our history particularly in the last 1,000 years, is that it is more the history of our invaders rather than the history of our ancestors who fought those invaders. Um, and were there some among the invaders who were relatively better? No doubt, yes, there were. There were some among British administrators also
Sure.
who were relatively better. So, some of the Adil Shahi rulers who are completely ignored in our history books. I don't see it as a Hindu Muslim issue, it's more a Delhi non Delhi issue. The Adil Shahis are completely ignored, even though Bijapur was a bigger city than Delhi or Agra after
Yes.
Vijayanagar was destroyed for a few decades, right? But they are completely ignored because they didn't rule Delhi. Some of the Adil Shahis were relatively decent rulers. Akbar, one must acknowledge, was a relatively decent ruler by the standards of his time. Some were terrible, like Aurangzeb, like Alauddin Khilji, but they were foreigners. That's a fact. Um, Akbar did not look like Hrithik Roshan or Prithviraj Kapoor. He was Central Asian. To us, he would have looked Chinese, but they weren't Chinese. They were Central Asian. They were from the steppe lands, which extends
True.
from Hungary to Manchuria. Hungary in Eastern Europe to Northeast China, Manchuria. It's a vast land of grasslands, essentially. Tons of horses, and among the greatest warriors the world has ever seen. Scythians, Mongols, Huns, Turks, these are all cousin tribes. And our invaders, particularly the Turkic colonial invaders, came from these areas. What I want to bring out is a few key things. One, the British colonial rule has not been called the Christian invasion. Then why is the Turkic colonial rule called the Islamic invasion? This, if you think about it, is a very mischievous approach that the British took. The aim very clearly was to divide Hindus and Muslims. Uh, Modern Indians are very clear that British rule had nothing to do with Indian Christians. But there are many, sadly, who are not clear that Turkic colonial rule had nothing to do with Indian Muslims either.
True.
Right? Um, and sadly, this British policy of divide and rule on our history continued even post 1947. Our establishment historians did, did not change the term Islamic invasion to Turkic colonial rule, which is a correct term. They were all Turks, they weren't Indians. As Faiz Ahmad Faiz has said, Pasmanda Muslims or Indian Muslims would not be allowed into Agra during Timurid Mughal times, but some upper caste Hindus were, right? So they were Indian Muslims were as oppressed as Indian Hindus by these foreign Turkic invaders.
It's interesting.
Our
Yeah. Go on.
ancestors were also very clear. If you see, the texts by the Vijayanagar emperors or Chhatrapati Shivaji, they didn't say Muslims, they said Turuksha. They called the Delhi Sultans and the Timurid Mughals Turuksha, which is Sanskrit for Turk. They were very clear that these guys were foreigners.
Yeah.
Right? We need to be clear of that. That's the first thing. Second thing, the way our history books tell us that we just kept losing every battle for 1,000 years. The British obviously had a selfish reason for again coming out with that narrative because they convinced us that we're a bunch of losers whose job is to just accept the next invasion, right?
And they civilized us and they trained us just to be clerks in the British
Exactly.
Empire.
And to
So
be
we are only
and
fit
to
to
be
be-
babus. That's
to be
all we are fit to
babus.
be. We're a conquered, defeated people.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
That's the
a British
narrative
narrative.
taught to us. But a question that had struck me when I was in school, that if what our history textbooks say is right, and that we were losing every battle for 1,000 years, why the hell are we still alive?
Yeah.
We should be dead. The same invaders who came to India, the Turks, the Huns, the Mongols, the Portuguese, British, Dutch, French, they went to every corner of the world. They wiped out all ancient civilizations. Aztecs, Mayas, Central America, Bechare Native Americans in America, Pharaonic Egyptians, Greco-Roman culture, the pagan European culture, all of them all wiped out. Great Zimbabwe in Africa, all
Yeah.
wiped out. But 1,000 years of invasions, we Indians are still standing. We are still here, right? So, in my mind, the real story of the last 1,000 years is not 1,000 years of defeats. It's 1,000 years of the greatest resistance in human history. No bunch of indigenous people have fought so long and so hard to protect their culture. Every other culture gave up. Zoroastrian Persia, where is it?
Yes.
The Zoroastrians are alive in India.
And
They are
the
massacred out
massacres,
of existence.
the massacres that we've seen in Persia, that Katleam happened in
In
India,
India too, but we fought.
But we
And
fought.
our ancestors fought and they kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. किसी ने हमारी संस्कृति को किसी ने हमें खैरात में नहीं दी है.
सही बात है.
हमारे पूर्वजों ने लड़ के इसे बचाया है. And that's the truth we should know. We aren't a bunch of defeated people. We're the toughest buggers around. We're the only ones who survived. The only ones.
In fact,
These
this is
same
something-
invaders wiped out every other civilization.
While
We're
they
the
came and
only
invaded.
ones who
Yeah.
survived. The only ones.
That's brilliant. You should mention that. In fact, even Allama Iqbal
Yeah.
has mentioned this. मिट गए रोमा यूनान और मिस्र, कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिट्टी नहीं हमारी,
हाँ.
सदियों
जो
रहा है दुश्मन दौरे जमा हमारा.
Ironically, it was Iqbal who said it.
Yes.
Because
And then he went to
we know
Pakistan.
we know what happened to him, regrettably. But what he said, I agree with.
And I want
There
you
is
to
something
elaborate.
special in us that we are still here, and that is the self-image we Indians should have. We are the toughest people around. Our ancestors were the toughest around. They kept fighting when every other ancient people, they surrendered.
Yep. And you mentioned that. So, okay, when all these Turkic invasions started, and they were breaking our temples and they were trying to destroy our culture, which is what they did world over. To conquer a country, you destroy their temples, you destroy their Nalanda, for example, you destroy their universities' knowledge, and you destroy the people. They did that to our country, but our country was constantly fighting. Your first book, and I want to talk to you for a moment about that, Suhaldev. If Somnath was raided by Mahmud of Ghazni, which is what this book also talks about, you had a king in Uttar Pradesh who was fighting the Ghazni army, Mahmud Ghazni's army.
True. And if it was any other culture, any other country with a hero like this, his statues would have been in every city.
Absolutely.
But we are such an idiotic bunch
Why?
that because we don't even know these stories because they haven't been taught to us. But let's be honest, we can't keep blaming the British forever. They've been gone for 75 years, nearly 80 years. It's time we take charge. Who's stopping us from decolonizing our history? Who's stopping us from learning these heroes? It's our fault. King Charles is not going to come and do a protest at Pragati Maidan, or where do the protests happen in Delhi?
Jantar Mantar.
Jantar
they used to
Mantar.
happen.
He's not going to do a protest in Jantar Mantar if we decolonize the education system that his ancestors set up. So someone like King Suhail, for example, he was the ruler of Shravasti, which is to the east of Ayodhya in UP, as you rightly said. He put together an army of Hindus of all castes, Indian Muslims, Indian Buddhists. He defeated the Ghaznavid army, and he followed the policy of Lord Krishna. Nothing like I will defeat you and let you go. He killed every single one of the Turkic soldiers.
Yes.
Didn't leave one person alive. And then legends say he burnt all their bodies. And then apparently the head of the commander was beheaded. He was beheaded, and the
Masood
head,
Salar or
yeah,
somebody,
and his head was sent back to Ghazni apparently,
Yeah.
with a message, and the message was well received because for over 150 years, no Turkic army came back to India. And while at that time the Turks were going around massacring much of the rest of the world, by the way,
Yeah.
the Turks destroyed at that time, because they were the foot soldiers of the Mongol army, they destroyed what was the high point of Arab Islamdom, which is the Abbasid Caliphate.
Yes.
They're the ones who destroyed it, but they didn't come back to India because
So, King Suhail
they got
Dev,
the message
Yes.
from what King Suhail Dev did.
King Suhail Dev's story is something that every child in Bharatvarsh should be brought up on. But we don't know the story. We don't know the story of King Suhail Dev and the manner in which he killed and destroyed these invaders, cut off their heads, and unfortunately in our country, till this year, I mean 2025, we were celebrating that Ghazi
but
Masood
it's-
Salar in our
but it-
country
but
as
it's-
Neza Mela.
But it's not just this, Gaurav. So many other
We celebrate
So many
terrorists.
other of our of our resistance heroes. That's what I call them, right? Like Abakka Rani, like
Yes.
Rani Chelammal, like Martanda Varma. And I'm saying again, it wasn't a Hindu-Muslim thing. It was an Indian foreigner thing.
Yes.
Many of the, some of the soldiers, they were descendants of Peshwa Bajirao, who fought in the Third Battle of Panipat. They were Indian Muslims
Yes.
who fought Abdali. It was, and I'm saying once again, even someone like a Chhatrapati Shivaji, he used the term Turushka
Yeah.
to refer to the invaders. He didn't use the term Muslim, right? He was a very proud Hindu,
Yeah.
and that I don't see what's wrong in that. You can be proud of who you are. We'll be proud of our religion, but it was not an internal division. It was a fight against foreigners.
It was a
This should
fight
be
against
made clear.
invaders. Why does our history glorify the invaders and not sons of the soil who were constantly fighting for independence against invaders and imposition of their culture on us? In your
Look,
view?
this needs analysis and research. Why the British did it is obvious, right? They wanted to convince us that we are a defeated people, uh, divide and rule, and convince us that we are a defeated people. Like I said, mischievously calling Turkic colonial rule as Islamic rule. Uh, and well, I mean, many Indian Muslims were convinced because when they asked for Pakistan,
Yes.
there are many Pakistanis who think they are Turkic descendants. The Turks don't buy
No,
that argument. Trust me.
absolutely. No,
Um,
Pakistanis, wherever they get money,
but
they think they're
yeah,
descendants of those
yeah,
people.
yeah. But that's one aspect of it. But why it continued post 1947 is genuinely a mystery. Um,
In your school
because
book and mine, did we read more about the Mughal rule of 330 years and not the Cholas who ruled us for 950 years?
on it is so obvious, okay, and yes, the Mughals should be covered. Timurid Mughals were among the largest empires that India ever had, but the Lodhis were glorified zamindars.
Yes.
Why are they given more airtime than the Chodas? Why are they given more airtime than the Gurjar Pratiharas or the Gurjar? So it's
Yeah.
not just about South India,
Yeah.
right? The Gurjar Pratiharas of Western India, the Sindhi rulers, the Karkotaks of Kashmir, the Ahoms of Assam, the
Yeah.
Palas, Buddhist Palas of Bengal, Adil Shahis who were Muslim, Adil Shahis, they are all ignored, right? It's not just an obsession with our foreigners. Among the things that strikes me in our history textbooks is also an excessive obsession with Delhi. Um, like apparently anything worth happening happened between Khyber and Agra in the last 1,000 years. And I'm not saying Delhi is not important. Of course, it's important, but it's not the only important part of India. There were
Correct.
other parts of India too. And if you covered the other parts of India, you'd get a more complete understanding of India. Because our history only covers that region, we see our land as essentially a land of farmers who were largely waiting for the next invader to come from Khyber for the last 1,000 years. But if they had taught us about the Gajapatis and the Kalingas, we would know we were actually among the largest seafaring nations
Yes.
on earth for most of human history.
Yes.
Right? The Bali Yatra, which happens in Odisha to this day, is an ancient festival. Bali is in Indonesia. This is an ancient festival which used to mark the day when traders and seafarers from Kalinga would sail out to Indonesia, right? We would know all this if we had a more complete understanding of our history, if it wasn't just obsessed with our invaders and with Khyber to Agra.
Yes.
It should cover other parts of India too.
And India's civilizational knowledge, our trade, okay, so Cholas, for example, and since your book is on the Cholas, the fact that they were trading and a culture was spreading to Malaysia, to Thailand, to Indonesia, to Sri Lanka, not through the sword, but through convincing them. And the biggest temples.
We didn't force them. We
Yeah.
attracted them to our culture. This was soft power the way it has rarely been seen in history. Even American soft power today is built on their hard power.
Yeah.
Right? And it's shocking that this was not taught to us. In our own education system, only those of us who are interested and would read outside of our education system and would read rebel books that
Yeah.
were not covered by our establishment would get to know about this. And these quote unquote rebel books weren't just written by Indians, they were written by foreigners as well, who wrote of the glory
So tell
of
us
India.
more about how our culture spread to Indonesia, for example,
So,
or Cambodia. Angkor Wat में इतने
yeah,
सुंदर बड़े मंदिर.
yeah. The
Now when
largest,
there is war happening between Thailand
it's
and
over Hindu
it's
temples out
over a
there.
Hindu temple.
Those many of your viewers would have traveled to Southeast Asia, and if they hadn't read enough, they'd be shocked to see murtis of Ganesh ji out there, murtis of Kuber, who we stopped worshipping in India,
Yes.
but they're still worshipped out there. And this, they are Buddhists, but they worship Hindu gods as well. In any case, it's all intermingled, no, in the Indian way.
Yes.
You can be a Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh at the same time, simultaneously.
Absolutely.
Just like in Japan, where 70% are Buddhists, 68% are Shintos.
Yeah.
Goes up to more than 100% because people identify with more than two religions. Japan accepts the dharmic reality, India doesn't. So we think people can only follow one religion. The dharmic, you can follow 2-3 religions, it's okay.
Which is
right?
exactly what a
Which
civilization
is what Southeast
all
Asia
about.
was as well. But how did our culture spread there? For the first millennium of the Common Era, the land of India, the Indian subcontinent, contributed 35% of the world's GDP.
Wow.
And now, this is not some WhatsApp gyan. This is perhaps the greatest study of economic history done by this British economic historian called Angus Maddison. It is certainly the finest study of economic history done anywhere, done at any point of time. And it has studied economic history for the last 2000 years and has studied GDP movements across various different lands. For the entire first millennium, India was by far the wealthiest land on earth, 35% of the world's GDP. Just to give you a perspective, US today is 25% of the world's GDP.
Yeah.
From the 11th century, there was a slow decline in our share of GDP, which by the 17th century had come down to 23-24%. And around 16th century, for the first time ever, we went behind 15th, 16th century, we went behind China. We became number 2, but even that was good enough. Why did our GDP go down relatively from 11th to the 17th century? My theory is that the main rulers at that time, the so-called Delhi Sultans, Turkic invaders, Timurid, Mughals, etc., used the immense wealth of India to create giant palaces and mausoleums rather than public infrastructure.
Yeah.
The Cholas used to create giant canal networks. Many of the lakes in Bhopal, many of the canal networks built by King Bhojdev Parmar, all the ancient kings built a lot of public infrastructure, canals, universities. All this leads to a growth of the economy, right? Port systems.
You pump money into the system.
Exactly. Whereas the Delhi Sultans and the Timurid Mughals used the immense wealth for giant palaces and mausoleums. So we have great, and Taj Mahal is very beautiful,
Yeah.
right? But it would have been much better if instead of building the Taj Mahal, Shah Jahan had built a canal in the Telangana Andhra region
Yeah.
where there was a great famine during that time. It would have added to the economy, you would have saved millions of lives too. But even then, our GDP didn't crash. It's just because it was wasted in palaces and mausoleums, the GDP slowly declined, came to around 23-24. British era is when it really crashed.
Well, that's when they
Okay.
were taking away all the
They
money.
were taking
to
wealth out of India.
Ah.
And India, in effect, funded large parts of the Industrial Revolution in England. The Scottish Enlightenment was funded by India, frankly.
Yeah.
And by the time the British left, we were maybe around 5-6% of the world's GDP. And you would think our decline should have stopped in 1947. You would be wrong because our decline continued post 1947. The lowest point, according to Angus Maddison's data, the lowest point in human history for the Indian economy compared to the rest of the world was the 1980s.
Yeah.
We were around 3-3.5% of the global GDP. This is on purchasing power
Yeah.
parity basis. Our turnaround started with 1991. And within the last 30 years, we are now back at around 7-8%.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, the sad part, the decline continued after the British. Socialism hurt us even more than the British rule did.
True. And if I
Now-
come back to go on, complete
Now,
your point.
this is our economic journey. Then the first millennium, when we were so dominant, obviously people were attracted to us
And our dominance came
and our culture spread.
because we were seafarers, something that we to an extent forgot. Great shipbuilders, great traders, not just Southeast Asia, but you've also spoken and written about it. Trade with Egypt, trade with Europe, trade with Rome. Indian silk
Bro,
getting into the Roman Empire,
there are brilliant
West Asia.
yeah, there are brilliant scholarly books written by authors like Sanjeev Sanyal, William Dalrymple, various others on this subject. Um, India became wealthy because of trading largely, right? And innovation. It's not that we suddenly got oil or something and we became.
No,
It
I mean, we
wasn't
had
a geopolitical
spices.
lottery,
Yeah, we had
but we
spices
had to
and
grow
silk.
our spices
Yeah,
and sell them to make money,
yeah,
right? That's how we made gold. India has the largest hoards of Roman gold coins outside of the Roman Empire. It's because of centuries of trade surpluses. Emperor Vespasian had banned trade with India in the second century Common Era because Rome was going bankrupt, importing goods from India and paying us in silver and gold.
yeah.
Pliny the Elder had complained that Rome is going bankrupt because we're just buying Indian manufactured goods. Our traders went to Southeast Asia, to China. They took our culture as well. This is how Buddhism, Hinduism spread to all these areas. The Roman soldiers used to follow a religion called Mithraism. Mithra was a Vedic god,
Yeah.
right? It was a very popular religion among. So there was trade, our culture, it all spread
And
to
we don't
these
have
areas.
knowledge of any of this predominantly. Outside scholars, historians, or those who are interested in it, the common people in our country don't know that Hindu gods or
Hmm.
Buddhist, Gautam Buddha, his idols have been found in Alexandria and in other parts
Yeah.
of Egypt, ancient Egypt, and in Europe, and in Southeast Asia, in the Hindu
And
religion,
China,
and
Japan,
China and
Central
Japan.
Asia. You can't blame the common people in India because it's not taught to them. It's
Yeah.
not their fault. Uh, the fault is, frankly, of the elite, which did not put this into our education system. And the sad part is there are many foreigners who have fairly analyzed this and shown the greatness of India, like David Collins, like David Frawley, for
Hmm.
example, so many others like this. And Indian scholars as well have started coming out with these books right now. There were Indian scholars in the past through R.C. Mazumdar, etc. But yes, sadly, their books were airbrushed out of
Out
our
of
syllabuses.
syllabus. In
Yeah.
fact, if you quoted it, the establishment historians would frown upon you and say, "ये लिखोगे तो marks नहीं आएंगे,"
Hmm.
um,
It's very
uh,
unfortunate.
which was very unfortunate. But the fact that we were a seafaring nation and we controlled the Indian Ocean region,
Yeah.
for the times of the Cholas. Everyone
In fact,
today,
even in ancient, even further than that, perhaps even during the Indus Saraswati civilization, there are
yes,
Mesopotamian texts that have been discovered. Mesopotamia is what modern Iraq,
Iraq.
which refers to a vast, wealthy land of brown skinned people in the east called Meluha.
Huh.
And many historians think that was actually what we call the Indus Saraswati civilization.
Which
That's
is
why I
what your
use that
first
term,
book,
which is
Immortals.
why I use the term Meluha.
Yeah.
So it's not a random term. It's actually drawn from the history books.
Yeah, in fact, that was the first one that
Yeah.
that you wrote and we read. But absolutely right. So trading with Mesopotamia, that civilization is lost. Trading with the Nile River civilization, to a very large
Egypt.
extent, they've been Egypt. They've been targeted. We remain and we flourish. When we talk about India's sea control, in terms of military power and trading power. It wasn't just trading power, it was also military power that
Yeah.
helped us dominate the Malacca Straits.
Yeah, true. Um, Emperor Rajen Choda, for example, controlled many of the islands on the Andamans and Nicobar. I don't know what it was called during that era, but
Yeah.
what we call Andaman and Nicobar today, because that was a way station to go towards Southeast Asia. In fact, when he launched his raids on Southeast Asia and his conquest out there,
Hmm.
he had, so some historians say, he had used the Andaman and Nicobar Islands
Hmm.
as a landing point. Because those islands control the entry into what is the most lucrative straits in the world, where much of even modern trade passes through, which is the
Absolutely.
Malacca Straits, the straits between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, because all traffic constricts out there. And yes, Indians were great seafarers, but we were also brilliant military guys. We rarely sent armies to conquer other lands, but if foreigners came to India, we used to beat them back. Alexander was frankly beaten back. He didn't really conquer that much of India, and who he fought, or and King Porus,
Yeah.
whose actual Indian name was Puru. Again, you ask most Indians what is the Indian name of Porus.
Yeah.
Educated, they may not know. It was either Puru or Purushottam.
Yeah.
So he, in effect, controlled maybe 1/4 of Pakistani Punjab.
Yeah.
So he was a relatively minor king, right? He wasn't a Nanda Empire. And he almost, and it was fought to a standstill with Alexander. What if he'd fought our main empire? The
And that's why
Huns,
he didn't want to
yeah,
fight the main
yeah,
Mauryan Empire.
the Huns who invaded Hungary, who invaded Europe and destroyed much of that, Attila the Hun.
Yeah.
Those same Huns came to India too. They were
Yeah.
beaten back and destroyed by Skandagupta. So there
Which-
was a time when we used to beat back invaders. There's no denying that from the 11th century we started losing. We need to self-analyze, why did we start losing?
What
Was
is
it
your
inter-
assessment? Why did we start losing?
A few things. I think internal divisions. In Who Were the Shudras, Dr. Ambedkar. I mean, many people talk of Dr. Ambedkar. Sadly, they don't read his books. And he's among our founding fathers of our republic. I think he was perhaps among the most brilliant of them all. He was a
Head and
genius.
shoulders above
Genius,
others in
genius.
his genius. Yeah.
So his book, Who Were the Shudras, he uses textual evidence to say that the caste system perhaps became rigid around 1500 years ago. Before that, there was heavy intermingling. And modern genetic research is also showing that there was heavy intermingling between different Indian communities that stopped somewhere around 1500 approximately years ago. And we know one of the markers of the caste system is roti beti ka rishta toot jata hai, right? You don't eat together and you don't intermarry. So was it our caste divisions that made us weaker, because of which we started losing? I don't know. This needs analysis. Second, could it be that we became too pacifist? India is no doubt is among the most ancient traditions of pacifism, Jainism, right? It is Jainism is non-violence under all circumstances, right? Buddhism is, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. In Hindu thought, it is okay. In self-defense, violence is completely okay. This is the spectrum of the dharmic religions. Hinduism, Sikhism, in self-defense is completely.
In fact,
violence is
Sikhi
completely
also
okay.
changed so much from
Yeah.
the times of Guru Nanak Dev
To this, yeah.
to the
To this,
10th Sikh
yeah.
Guru, Guru Gobind
But-
Singh Ji.
So did pacifism become too strong in India? My wife is Jain, and my father-in-law, he told me something very interesting. He said, often we don't realize you have the privilege of being non-violent. If there's someone standing in front of you who loves you, who's willing to be violent to protect you, right? Then you can have the privilege of being non-violent. And there's a learning that I get from the Jain side of the family. There's a beautiful partnership between those who are willing to be violent and those who are willing to be non-violent. Because if there's too much violence, society becomes chaotic. Look
Yeah.
at Syria, look
Yeah.
at Pakistan. If there's too much non-violence, you will get rolled over.
Then it gets disintegrated. Yeah.
But you have the beauties of culture, of civilization that comes with non-violence, no doubt. You need a mix of both, right?
Absolutely.
And that is the balance that India had. Did we go too much into the
Pacifism.
pacifist side?
In fact, the Buddhists, if you see the Bamyan Buddhas, that's where the main invasions and conversions
Yeah.
were also taking
Yeah,
place
yeah.
under the sword.
From what historians say, what is Afghanistan, Pakistan today were the majority Buddhist areas.
Viharas and stupas.
Yeah. Which is where, they were wiped out. They were wiped out.
Yeah.
And the Turks who invaded and killed most of them, as Dr. Ambedkar has himself said, there's the Turks who wiped out Buddhism in India.
Yeah.
Mahmud Ghazni, Alauddin Khilji, they were all Turks. Alauddin Khilji, the Mughals, they were all Turks, Timurids. And the Turks the Turks were Buddhists actually
Yeah.
for most of history. They converted out of Buddhism relatively late. So some historians say even Mahmud Ghazni's father was perhaps Buddhist, or certainly his grandfather, right? So the Turks were most aggressive on the religion they converted out of.
Because they then that
Yeah.
inherent
So
pacifism.
even in their heartlands, which is in the Turkic steppe lands, they destroyed most of the viharas.
Yeah.
Their own viharas, right? So that's actually what ended up happening.
And
This
then
is what
when
Dr.
these,
Ambedkar theorizes in his book.
then when these invasions started coming deeper into our country, look at universities like Nalanda. They were destroyed, so our knowledge base was destroyed.
Yeah.
Did that make us weaker in our heads, that we became used to the idea that fine, we were always subservient, we were always defeated because we lost our knowledge, that strength that comes
Bit
from
of chicken and
knowledge.
the egg. But it's not that we became a defeated people after the destruction of Nalanda, because we're still here,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Chhatrapati Shivaji raised his banner of revolt a few centuries after Nalanda
Yep.
was destroyed. So we're still here.
Why
But
did we then
why did the Nalanda get destroyed? We should
Yeah.
think of that too. That universities get destroyed when there aren't warriors to defend them, right? So the partnership between the intellectuals, the warriors, the businessmen, all of society is what makes a society strong.
Yeah.
If we become socialist and start seeing our businessmen as thieves, we'll become poor, right?
Absolutely.
We need our own businessmen, and we are a culture that worshipped the goddess of wealth. Yeah.
Yes.
How can we be socialist? It's a completely un-Indian philosophy.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have your own businessmen, you will become poor, right? I admit there are some businessmen who are corrupt, so you need regulations to control them, right? Similarly, if you don't have your own warriors, you will get defeated,
Yeah.
right? I admit there are some warriors who could become barbaric. So we need our own guidelines, our own societal controls to make sure our warriors don't become barbaric. They don't become like the Pakistanis,
Yeah.
right?
And that is why we have dharm.
Yeah.
And dharm for us,
Same
as
with intellectuals.
Yes.
Sometimes intellectuals can end up doing a lot of damage
Yes.
to society if they're not loyal to the society. Look what's happening in many of the Western universities.
Yes.
The most anti-West, the heartland of anti-West philosophies comes from Western universities. Their intellectuals are working against their own society. How is this beneficial? So yes, you do need balance. You need your intellectuals, warriors, businessmen to work for the good of India, for the good of the society. But just because some of them are bad, you don't wipe all of them out.
Absolutely.
Then you will become,
a barbaric society
Yeah.
or a destroyed society. One thing about our culture, which often our generation doesn't know much about, and I want you to elaborate on it. When we were children, we were always told that once in your lifetime you do the Char Dham Yatra that unites the entire country, north, south, east, west. You see all the Jyotirlings, you see all the Shakti Peeths. That just shows how our culture and our religion unites our country. And there was this tradition that from the north you would bring water from Ma Ganga to Kaveri, and water from Kaveri to Ma Ganga. That
Yeah.
culture again unites our country, north south. There is no divide.
These traditions, again, sadly, it's not taught in our education system. And again, it had taken a foreigner to write a book, at least a modern foreigner, someone called Diana Eck. She's a brilliant Harvard professor who'd written this book called The Sacred Geography, who'd written how India was united through the pilgrimage routes. And there was this beautiful line, I'm paraphrasing it. She said, unlike most other cultures in the world, India wasn't built by the power of its kings. It was
Yes.
built on the footsteps of its pilgrims. Right? It's such a beautiful way to put it. And you're so right. There are the priests in Pashupati Nathji or Kedarnathji in the north come from the south.
Yeah.
And the priests of many great South Indian temples come from the
Uttar
north.
Kashi, from the north. Yeah.
Why is the name of Rajendra Choda's capital Gangaikonda Chodapuram? Because he had brought the waters of the Ganga down to his land, which was on the banks of the Kaveri river, and he'd taken on the title Gangaikonda,
Yeah.
the bringer of the Ganga. It was clearly an emotion. He changed his name, he changed his title. It was clearly an emotional moment for him.
So there was
Um,
never any north south divide in our civilization.
Many of these things have been created now. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't local cultures. Of course,
Of
there
course.
were. Of course, there were. India's unity was never in the form of all flowers have to convert to a rose, right? It was that you can be a sunflower, I can be, mogra, he can be a lily. That's okay, but there's a string that binds us all together in a mala. So it's a light touch unity. That unity was there, but we could celebrate our own culture as well. And there's a very different model from the Western model where everyone has to convert into one religion, everyone has to speak one language, everyone has to be of one race. That's not the way we were, but that doesn't mean unity wasn't there. We quoted Vishnu Puran earlier. There are many other texts like this of our own ancestors conceptualizing of India as one. But let's see how ancient foreigners saw India. Okay, so there's this series of books, 4 books called the India They Saw, compiled by Meenakshi Jain, Padma Shri historian, Meenakshi Jain and Sandhya Jain. It has translated these 4 books, translated the travelogues of foreigners who visited India for the last 2.5-3,000 years, from ancient Greek,
Huensan,
Romans till
Fayan.
now,
Ha.
till British.
Ha.
There was this text that was translated of Sri Lankan Buddhists who came to Tamil Nadu, that time's Tamil Nadu, 1500 years ago, just across the Pork Straits. 1500 years ago, moment they landed in that area of Vaigai River, they went down on their knees, kissed the ground, that this is the land where Gautam Buddha was born.
Wow.
Now, where was Gautam Buddha actually born? Indo-Nepal border.
Yep.
2000 kilometers from the Vaigai River in Tamil lands. But the Lankans were clear. They have come to the land where Gautam Buddha was born. Even they were clear that Tamil Nadu and the India-Nepal border and UP Bihar are one and the same land.
Yeah.
Right? So foreigners were also clear.
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of our country. In your book, you've also imagined, if I may, how when there is threat to one part, the other part comes to get, comes to help. For example, when there's an attack on the Somnath temple, the Cholas, you've imagined that they went and avenged the plunder of Somnath. How would you respond to those who say this is not history, this is historical fiction, this is imagining things, this is not the truth?
Firstly, I'm not the inventor of the genre of historical fiction. Historical fiction has been around for thousands of years. Mughal Azam, for example, was historical fiction, very good historical fiction, but there was no Anarkali. Salim, who became Jahangir, was not a brilliant warrior like Dilip Kumar. He was a drugged out moron. Okay,
Oh,
his
absolutely.
wife actually ran. His wife was very capable,
Yeah.
and she actually ran. Many argue that she actually ran his empire. Akbar was a great conqueror, no doubt about it. But Akbar did not look like Prithviraj Kapoor.
Yeah.
You see his descriptions.
Or
He had
Hrithik
Mongoloid,
Roshan.
yeah, or Hrithik Roshan. He had Mongoloid features, right?
Yeah.
To us, he would have looked Chinese. He wasn't Chinese. I'll repeat.
Yeah.
He was from Central Asia. He did not speak Urdu. Urdu is our language.
Yeah.
He would have spoken Turkic or Persian. Most Indians wouldn't have understood anything of what he was saying. That was historical fiction. The point of historical fiction is, are the facts you're putting in there broadly correct? And facts that aren't available, you bring in your imagination in there, right? So
And this happens world over.
it happens world over. So
Yeah.
showing Akbar as Prithviraj Kapoor
Yeah.
and with Indian features speaking Urdu is actually changing history,
Yeah.
right? But the fact that Rajendra Chola lived at the same time as Mahmud Ghazni, the fact that Rajendra Chola was a very devout Shaivite, the fact that Rajendra Chola and Emperor Bhojdev Parmar of Central India were great allies is also a historical fact. The fact that Somnath Ji was attacked is also a historical fact. What I have done is filled in my imagination within the facts that we don't know, right? I'm not saying Emperor Rajendra Chola fought Aurangzeb because that's historically
True.
wrong.
But
This is
Chhatrapati
historical-
Shivaji Maharaj
yeah,
did.
This is historical fiction. And the thing with historical fiction, the way I see it, is what is the aim in it? So even though Mughal Azam was historical fiction, what was K. Asif's aim in it, right? I don't know what he was thinking, but my supposition on seeing the movie, he wanted a message of unity, right? Maybe he wanted to show that they weren't foreigners, they were Indians. And he showed Akbar celebrating Krishna Janmashtami with his wife Jodha. And it can be argued that actually his wife's name was not Jodha Bai. That is also historically inaccurate. But the aim was unity. So that makes it a positive historical fiction. If you write historical fiction where the aim is internal divisions today, causing chaos today, then I would argue that's wrong, right? The aim of my book is unity as well. There are Indians from across the land who come together to fight a foreign invader and to get vengeance for a crime that he did on us.
Yeah.
And this is Indians of all Hindus and Muslims
Yeah.
go in that assassination squad. People from Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Bengal, Kashmir get together to Karnataka, and MP they get together to fight him. The message is of unity.
And the
That's
message is
my
never
point.
spare the enemy.
That 100%, boss. Look, this thing that our tradition has been to turn the other cheek is not really true, boss.
Yeah.
Okay. We have never landed the first blow. Rarely. We don't send armies to conquer other lands. But if you slap us, our ancestors have shown repeatedly, if you slap us, we don't turn the other cheek, we'll freaking box you back.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
We will teach you a lesson that you think twice about wanting to attack us. We'll not attack you if you're a foreigner. We want nothing to, we don't want to oppress you. But don't think we're just going to roll over. No, we won't.
And that's why we exist and flourish as a civilization
Exactly,
today,
because our-
we didn't roll over and play dead.
We fought.
We fought.
Zoroastrian Persia, which was among the greatest civilizations of its time,
Yeah.
lasted just 50 years
Yeah.
when the Arabs invaded. 50 years, that's it. All their cities, temples, Persepolis, all wiped out, man. All wiped out. They survive only here.
Now there are inscriptions that are emerging in modern day Persia that have parts of Sanskrit in it, and that just shows how widespread our language and our culture had spread across
Actually,
the world.
Zoroastrian Persia and Vedic India were actually cousin cultures.
They were cousin cultures.
Yeah.
And is your next book, because when we say that we were resisting these invaders at all times, which is a fact, right from the time, so you mentioned Sohal Dev, the Sikhs, and I'm so proud of our Sikh history. How it changed from Guru Nanak Dev to Guru Arjan Dev, who was in the times of Jahangir. He fought for Hindus. Guru Tegh Bahadur, he was fighting for Hindus, made the supreme sacrifice of his life. Guru Gobind Singh Ji fought back. Banda Singh Bahadur, how he fought back. Is your next book then looking at this as we talk about constantly fighting to
There are
keep our
so
civilization
many
alive?
heroes that need to be covered. Lachit Borphukan, for example,
yes.
the
The
Ahom
Ahom
general,
king.
Abakka Rani, Martanda Varma, who destroyed the Dutch navy. So many across India who fought. Banda Singh Bahadur, as you said
Yes.
so rightly. So many across. They all need to be acknowledged. And my aim with the Indic Chronicles is to bring all these stories out. Ideally, they should be there in our textbooks,
Yes.
these stories. Till such time as that happens, I want to bring out the Indic Chronicles books to celebrate our ancestors who fought
Absolutely.
these invaders and to thank them. It's because of them that we are still alive. They don't expect us to be as brave as them, but at least they expect us, it's a fair expectation, at least remember them, at least celebrate them. How terrible are we idiotic Indians of today if we don't even remember these great ancestors because of whom we are alive today?
Yes.
How worthless are we that we won't even celebrate their sacrifices? That's the least we can do.
And I'm so glad you're doing that. And I'm so glad I have this opportunity, not just to talk to you, but to share this, as wide as we can. And we will continue to do so. So wish you all the best
Thank
for
you.
your next book. Amish, many, many thanks for joining me here and being a part of this Chakraview conversation.
Thank you. Chakraview, I'll end with this. Chakraview can only be broken with knowledge.
Yes.
Abhimanyu had no shortage of bravery.
Yes.
Right? It was Arjun who had the knowledge. We need to revive the knowledge of our ancestors. That's how we'll break the Chakraview.
That's how we break the Chakraview. And this is exactly what we intend to do, to bring out these tales of unparalleled valor of our ancestors. Because if you and I are able to follow our dharma today is because of the supreme sacrifice and that endless sacrifices made by our ancestors. We'll be back with the next round of Chakravyuh with more knowledge, because as Amishwari rightly put it, it's knowledge that will help us break the Chakravyuh. Many thanks for watching.